Hey guys, so sorry I've been dead for a hot minute. I won't bore anyone with the here's what I've been up to, but sorry, I think I'm back now. Just jumping right into the topic. This is something I've wanted to talk about since I started my channel, but I was always nervous I'd come off as judgmental, and I personally am deeply embarrassed myself by the preachy vegan types, so obviously I'm trying to avoid that here. But that being said, I care about this topic a lot, and I also think I have maybe some unique perspectives, at least at the end, to some degree. I also know it's going to both piss off other vegans, because the answer to the title is kind of sometimes sort of, but not no, and meat eaters, because the rest of the video. So let's just get into it. So this video exists to kind of answer two questions. One, can I make an argument that this action is ethical on its own merits? And two, will I place judgment on someone for taking that action due to the circumstantial and societal factors? And a little third half point, mostly because I want to talk about it, which I'll explain later in the video. I also want to note for anyone who clicked on this video but is not familiar with my content, I usually talk about religion as an anti-theist, and as such, I do not believe morality and ethics are objective. In my opinion, it's a trait that we have complicated from altruism, which is exhibited in many intelligent social species, and I'm also a leftist, and as such, I want to seriously consider how much of an actual choice it is whenever people eat meat due to things like poverty, food deserts, etc. Moving on from that, however, I'm starting with question one. Is this action ethical on its own merits? I think unsurprisingly, my answer is no, but I base that answer on sort of two follow-up criteria. One, humans, unlike, say, a lion, do not need to eat meat on a biological level to survive. While it is very irritating hearing other vegans spew pseudoscience claiming humans are not omnivores, we are also capable of getting all of our vital nutrients from plants, on a purely is this possible level. I'll go into this more when discussing the second category, but obviously not all humans have access to a wide enough variety of plant-based foods to live off of, and for most of our history that was true of all humans. But it is something our bodies are perfectly capable of handling whenever we do have access to that variety. We are not obligate carnivores, essentially. The second criteria is that humans are able to contemplate, converse, and consider ethics. While many animals exhibit altruism and social expectations aligned with that behavior in their social groups, we have the benefit of not only complex understandings of how our behaviors affect others, but language to discuss topics like this in the first place. So while an animal like a black bear may meet the first criteria of being able to sustain its body function without meat, it is not expected to do so because it's unable to form these complex thoughts around if that sacrifice is something that it's willing to make in order to prevent the suffering of other beings. Well, again, I'll state I don't believe in objective morality, and this is my personal stance. The criteria gone over just now exist to understand the necessity of eating meat. I do not have a biological need in order to ensure survival, and I do have the ability to understand that meat can cause harm. My personal philosophy around this, I guess, is basically that it is not right to impose my will upon that of another being. However, obviously there are times when this is needed, either for survival or because you can confidently know you know better than the creature having its own will disrupted. Maybe a bit of a weird example, but me and my fiance had a very moral philosophy-centered acid trip, and we were discussing this topic of when it is and is not appropriate to, quote-unquote, force your will upon another, and had just about concluded the answer was never under any circumstances, until our cat October tried to get into the ceiling panel in our basement, and we picked her up to stop her, to impose our will upon hers, and blocked it off. I confidently knew better than my cat, so I imposed my will upon her, if you will, because I know she can get stuck in there and hurt herself. She does not know that. She just wants a place to explore that she didn't know existed until that day. Point being, there are times when taking choices away from another being is appropriate, but it's important to consider, one, the necessity of that choice, and two, how confident you are that you know better than the one having their choice taken from them, and that you know that that choice is in their best interest. Going back to the actual topic, meat is not a necessity on a biological level, and the action of eating another creature is done not in the best interest of it, so it is not the same as pulling a child out of the road or moving your cat off a shelf by a wiggly ceiling panel. I do not have the right to end another being's life for my own personal gain. That animal does not have an understanding to consent to the action, it is harmed irreparably by its process, and it gains nothing from it. So my personal answer to the question is no, eating meat is not ethical as an action by its own merit, with two exceptions where I do believe it is an ethical choice regardless of outside factors, but that's my little 2.5 that I mentioned earlier, and I'll get to it at the end. All that being said, forever, I am now going to get into the part that will make other vegans mad, and hopefully all the people who are already typing that I'm classist or ableist in the comments will have stuck around for. Will I place judgment on someone for taking that action due to circumstantial and societal factors? Generally, in most cases, no. When it comes to situations like poverty, food deserts, colonized and underdeveloped countries, etc., the action of eating meat cannot even be reasonably considered a choice. I've mentioned this in religion videos before, but if a choice is not both informed and given the freedom to make any of the choices that are a reasonable possibility, it is not truly a choice. Starve or eat meat is not a choice in the exact same way believe or go to hell is not a choice. I'm ready for a lot of other vegans to come in with the, but plants are actually cheaper and it's not any harder to make plant-based foods arguments. But I want to bring up a few things with that. One, food deserts exist. Sometimes there is literally not an option to buy vegetables at all, let alone fresh produce. Yes, a cauliflower steak is cheaper to make than ground beef, but you have to have cauliflower to begin with. There's also an element of variety. You do need at least somewhat more variety in what you eat as a vegan to be able to sustain yourself, even more so whenever you consider that many people living in areas like this work labor-intensive jobs or have children. There is not going to realistically be enough options to sustain someone and meet all of their needs, and even if there are, people cannot be expected to have enough hours in the day to research what food they can give themselves and their family that's healthy with the options available to them, and also have time to cook it. Yes, it is technically possible in some of these circumstances, sure, but it is an unreasonable expectation. I have personally noticed how much more variety there is in what I eat as a vegan than when I was vegetarian, and I appreciate that, but it is also a privilege for me to even have that option. Not everyone can realistically make that choice. And I do want to end this section with something. I do still think it's unethical for people in poverty and food deserts to be eating meat, believe it or not. However, because I do not believe that that action is a true choice, I place the burden of that unethical action not on those individuals or communities, but on our current economic and governmental systems. I stand by everything I said in the first category. Killing another being for personal gain when not biologically necessary is wrong. But I cannot fault people living in food deserts for that action, and I place zero judgment on them as individuals for it. They did not create the circumstances that resulted in them eating meat. I.e., blame capitalism, not workers. The next point often brought up by people arguing this topic is that of Inuit or more broadly indigenous communities. I want to note here that I am indigenous myself, but I'm not Inuit. However, this is actually another area where I don't take moral judgment or issue despite being a vegan indigenous person myself. As I stated earlier, I don't believe in objective morality, where obviously I do on an emotional level find my own personal moral framework to be the most quote-unquote correct, as it is what I choose to stand by. Anyone who's seen my videos know that I don't really place any value on emotional arguments in any capacity. From a non-emotion-based position, my personal code of ethics is not better than anyone else's. And essentially, this is an area where I can actually respect and understand that difference in values. And to be honest, it's not even a majorly deep difference in values, and honestly more so a difference in how those values are acted upon or treated on an individual or community level. Indigenous communities who hunt have respect for the animal and its place in its ecosystem. They are not needlessly cruel, they do not overhunt or fish, they do not keep animals in bad conditions before its death for personal gain. As well as the fact that the meat has cultural value, and as an indigenous person, I am maybe overly sympathetic to how our cultures have been stripped from us. Frankly, that's something I don't want to contribute to or be any part of. When it comes to the quote-unquote need aspect of my criteria earlier, I do see keeping cultures that have been colonized, killed, suppressed, and beaten out of people as a need. Indigenous communities are not contributing to the death of animals on a large supermarket scale, and they do not view their lives as commodities. So again, while I personally choose to not partake in hunting or fishing as an indigenous person, I don't expect other people to abandon their values or culture based on my personal beliefs. I do not place judgment on that. And I think that there's good reason for those beliefs existing as opposed to, well, animals' lives aren't as valuable as people's, or, yeah, but I like bacon. Okay, all that being said, there are arguments people make that meat is ethical that I cannot get behind. While the previous two consist of, this is unethical but the individual is not responsible for it, the government is, and a difference in values that I personally think is either harmless or even sometimes positive, that is not so much the case for other things. While I will admit many of these arguments consist of essentially vegans are annoying and I'm going to try and annoy them back, and are not as deep of thoughts as the previous two, I still want to briefly address them in maybe less serious of a manner. While the previous topics are frequently brought up in genuine debate, the most common thing I hear is, I'd be vegan, but I like insert meat item here too much. Well, I know this is usually said in a lighthearted way, and yes, when it's said to me casually, I don't argue with it because honestly that's pointless and makes me annoying too. This does annoy the shit out of me. I do actually have a lot more respect for people who can acknowledge the sentiment that this is conveying on a more thoughtful level. I've heard other content creators, as well as people I know, express that they know that their actions are harming something, that they wish it didn't, but they either don't have the physical willpower, moral backbone, or just care, time, effort, whatever, to turn that kind of back of your mind discomfort into change in behavior. It's intellectually honest to admit you know an action is wrong and that you are at fault for not changing it. While I don't personally understand being okay with ignoring that in this specific context, it's also not my position to tell people which values they should hold to a degree high enough to result in change. I think everyone has some action they take that they know isn't great, but it just doesn't change. I mean, me and my fiance are trying to reduce our plastic waste, but we buy plastic water bottles by the 40 pack because he will literally become dehydrated since he's super picky about water. There's probably a solution to that, but we do it anyway. We try and offset it by not buying other single-use plastic items, but yeah, we both still feel a little bit bad about having all the bottles and continue to buy them. All that being said, the I'd be vegan but I love bacon too much is just, it's irritating because like, hey, you're almost there, you're almost getting it, but instead you're just trying to be funny with something that I hold as a deep value. I don't know, that's all I'm touching with that one because honestly it's not a real argument, but it annoys me so much that I had to mention it. I also think assigning less value to the lives of farm animals is just morally inconsistent. It's a common argument that comes from a lot of different places, but none of them are valid arguments to me. There are many arguments that the lives of non-human animals are just inherently less valuable, and sometimes that's from a religious argument, that we have souls or we're made in God's image, etc. And obviously, based on the other content on my channel, that's not an argument I hold any level of respect for. I won't go too deep into my thoughts on religion here because I have other content for that, but there is zero basis for humans being different from other animals. We share more of our genome with chimpanzees than lions do with tigers. Everything we decide is somehow uniquely human is not. From language to medicine to, like mentioned before, morality, to complex tool usage and culture, ritual and respect for our dead, we are not special. The argument from souls or God's image is just an argument of ignorance and human exceptionalism, something that requires a deep level of cognitive dissonance and willful ignorance to accept. The other common argument is that of intelligence, and this argument falls apart very quickly. There's the obvious example of, okay, will you farm, kill, and eat babies and people with intellectual disabilities then? I would hope not. This argument doesn't make sense when applied to humans, which I'm getting to with human exceptionalism again. But also that it's clear that this value is not even consistent among non-human animals. Pigs are much smarter than hamsters, yet many people will eat bacon, then go upstairs to hold their hamster and are disgusted by the idea of eating it. Chickens are much smarter than they're given credit for, but we eat them anyway. We allow ourselves to experiment on rats, but we won't eat them. People will experiment on and eat rabbits, yet after owning rabbits, they're the only and exclusive meat I ask people not to eat around me. This argument is often presented as value from intelligence, but what it really is value from familiarity. I had a science teacher in high school with pet chickens. They were never intended to be eaten, and while they did use their eggs, they were pets first for his daughter. Chicken is the only meat that he doesn't eat after owning them. My art teacher in elementary school and my principal in 8th grade were the same way. They both had pet pigs and didn't eat pork as a result. Obviously, this isn't true of all cases, but when pigs are smarter than dogs and you say that intelligence is why you only eat pigs, it's not intelligence you care about. People are more reluctant to eat animals that they've had a bond with, and that also has a different assigned role in our society. Dogs, pets. Pigs, food. Rabbits can be both, and rats are lab animals first, but pets second. And this, along with often other religious elements different from those discussed before, contribute to which animals get to have their sentience disregarded. Many countries all over the world eat horses, but in America we see horses as pets. Maybe some people are a little more comfortable eating them than, say, a dog, but it's not an animal we see as food first. Point being, argument from intelligence is not truly about intelligence because not only would, thankfully, people not apply this to other humans, but the animals deemed less intelligent don't actually have any relevance to their own intelligence as that specific animal, just the context that that person has experienced that animal in. I do want to move on to my final point, which is going to sound less serious / out of pocket compared to the rest of it, but this is something that I do truly believe and I want to discuss because I think it's worth thinking about. Is it ever ethical to eat meat on its own merit? The same question is at the start of this video, but in this version of the question, I'm considering any meat, as in muscle and organ tissue from a member of the animal kingdom. And I have two situations where the answer is yes. 1, roadkill / natural death, including pets. 2, consensual natural death cannibalism. I know that sounds kind of insane, but those are literally the only two situations I can think of. The more obvious answer in regards to roadkill or even pets is that no harm is committed. So long as the full animal is used, as it would otherwise be eaten by wildlife, and therefore is wasted if not, it's fine. The animal does not have a concept of death in the way that we do, so it cannot perceive that its body was desecrated, nor does it have loved ones who understand the concept of desecrating a corpse to care. Eat the dead raccoon, I do not care. This exclusively does not apply to Asian elephants because they do have a concept of ritual after death. Regarding the more, obviously unconventional answer of the two, however, I include consensual alongside natural death with humans, cannibalism, because while an animal does not have a society to feel as though its body is being desecrated, a human does, again excluding Asian elephants. I unironically want to be eaten when I die, and have for years. Mainly because I think it's funny, but also to essentially prove the point of what's being discussed in this video. If you won't eat it, why? No harm came from the production of the thing you're eating. No corpse was desecrated, as that was my funeral wishes. But it's also more uncomfortable somehow than eating something that did require harm and did not understand its role or consent to that role in that experience. The criteria of understanding ethics does not apply to animals eating other animals or to them being eaten themselves because they do not understand that concept. But my wholehearted truthful opinion is that the only 100% ethically sound way to consume meat is through consensual natural death cannibalism. Zero harm is committed in the production of that meat, zero harm is created by consuming it, as opposed to without consent. So what makes it so uncomfortable overeating meat that does require harm? I think it does come back to familiarity. It's not that it's more wrong, it's that you see that meat as a piece, a chunk, of a sentient being. Whereas you can divorce a pig or a chicken from not only its sentience, but from its origin of a living thing at all. That's the unhinged end to the video, I guess. I know that that's probably an ending that doesn't help in it being taken seriously, but it is a question I think is worth asking yourself. Would you feel more or less uncomfortable eating meat you knew came from a factory farm, or of a human who died naturally and consented to its consumption? I don't know. Do the answers in the comments thing or whatever. I hate saying YouTuber engagement phrases, but I really just genuinely want to know people's thoughts on that because I love this topic and I think it deserves its own video. The little consensus that I do at the end of all these videos, however, just be conscious of how your actions may affect others, and especially so when they're other beings you may not consider like an animal. My own moral rules for myself aren't universal truths, and unfortunately, even many people who may agree with them probably don't have the privilege to follow them. Be thoughtful, be curious, and be kind. Like and subscribe if you like it, or dislike if I pissed you off. Thank you guys for watching. Ha de.
The children think too much. They've hardly a fear of God. Always asking questions they should only wish away. Sundays every